As Halloween approached, the mall where I worked as a security guard transformed into a bustling hub of excitement and activity. Decorated with orange and black streamers, fake cobwebs stretched across every corner, and pumpkins lining the walkways, the festive spirit was undeniable. But beneath the cheerful decorations and throngs of shoppers, something unsettling lingered in the air. Something that would soon turn my routine security shift into a nightmarish experience. I remember it was a chilly October evening, the kind that hints at the approaching winter. The mall was packed with last-minute shoppers looking for Halloween costumes and decorations, adding to the usual chaos. As one of the security guards, it was my job to patrol the premises, ensuring everything was in order and everyone was safe. My round started off normally. I checked the various shops, greeted the store owners, and kept an eye on the crowds. Everything seemed typical until I saw him, a figure cloaked in darkness, moving smoothly through the crowd like a shadow. His presence was immediately unsettling, not just because of his strange, silent demeanor, but because of the palpable aura of dread that seemed to cling to him. He bumped into me as he passed, and an involuntary shiver ran down my spine. I felt a wave of fear, something us security guards are trained to manage, but this was different, primal, and chilling. Reacting almost instinctively, I called out to him, "Hey, you, stop right there." But he didn't acknowledge me. It was as if I wasn't even there. Determined to find out who, or what, this was, I followed him, trying to get a better look at his face beneath the hood. But just as I was closing the distance, my attention was abruptly pulled away by a commotion in a nearby shop. An elderly Asian man had fallen down, and his groceries were scattered around him. Switching gears, I rushed to help him up, my training as a security guard kicking in. After ensuring he was all right and seeing him off with a grateful nod, I turned back to continue my pursuit of the mysterious cloaked figure. But he was gone, vanished into thin air. I scanned the area, but there was no sign of him anywhere. Confused and slightly unnerved, I decided to take a break to clear my head. As I walked towards the break room, I ran into Rex, a fellow guard and a good friend. "Hey, didn't you happen to see a cloaked figure walking around?" I asked him casually, trying not to sound too concerned. Rex turned pale at my question, his usual easygoing smile replaced by a look of genuine fear. "Yes, and this time it was looking at me," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. We sat down, but neither of us felt like bringing up the subject again. The rest of my break passed in uneasy silence. We didn't know if the figure was just a person in a costume, playing a prank, or something else entirely. Finishing my lunch, I headed back out as the mall started to empty and the shops began to close. With the onset of night, the atmosphere changed. The festive decorations that seemed charming under the bright mall lights now cast strange, elongated shadows in the dimming light. My shift turned into the night watch, and I hopped on my cart, the only source of illumination being the small spotlight at the front. As I made my rounds on the bottom floor, the sense of unease grew. The mall was pitch black except for the cone of light from my cart, and every shadow seemed to twitch at the corners of my vision. I couldn't shake the feeling that the cloaked figure was still somewhere in the mall with me, hiding in the darkness. Then, out of the silence, came a sound that made my blood run cold. A child's laugh, echoing around me, bouncing off the walls in a taunting, spectral chorus. "Who's there?" I yelled into the darkness, my voice sounding small and feeble against the vast, empty corridors of the mall. The laughing stopped abruptly, replaced by an oppressive silence. Then, a loud bang from the second floor made me jump. Steeling my nerves, I drove the cart to the escalator and headed up, determined to confront whatever was causing these disturbances. As I rounded the corner on the second floor, the sight that greeted me was both bizarre and terrifying. A vending machine lay on its side, contents spilled across the floor. Next to it was a large, dark mass that at first I couldn't make sense of. Shining my light on it, the beam revealed something out of a nightmare. The rear end was that of a grizzly bear, massive and foreboding. But as the creature turned to face me, the front half was all bobcat, glowing red eyes, snarling mouth, and long fangs. The creature rose on its hind legs, reaching a staggering height of 7 to 8 feet, balancing its grotesque body with outstretched bobcat paws. The creature stared at me, and in a distorted echo of my own voice, it spoke, "Who's there?" before letting out a chilling, guttural screech that filled the mall. I didn't wait around to see what it would do next. I jumped back into the cart, my heart pounding as I sped to the nearest exit, not stopping until I was safely outside. Even now, as I continue to work at the same mall, I've never encountered that creature again. But the memory of that night lingers, a constant reminder of the inexplicable and unknown that might still roam the dark corners of our seemingly safe spaces. After that night, life at the mall had to continue as normal, but nothing felt quite the same for me. The bustling crowds, the laughter of children, and the cheerful banter of shoppers now carried an undercurrent of something sinister, a reminder of the darkness that seemed to lurk just beneath the surface. The memories of the cloaked figure and the monstrous creature haunted me, making every shadow and every unexplained noise a cause for alarm. The next few days were tense and uneasy. I spent them with a heightened sense of awareness, constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting at any moment to see that grotesque combination of grizzly and bobcat or the mysterious cloaked figure reappearing from the shadows. But they never did. Instead, there was an oppressive silence, as if the mall itself was holding its breath, waiting for something dreadful to unfold. Rex and I barely spoke about what had happened. It was as if by acknowledging it, we might somehow bring it into reality again. However, the bond between us grew stronger, united by the shared terror of that night. We became more vigilant, more protective of the space we were entrusted to safeguard. As Halloween approached, the mall management ramped up the festive activities, hoping to attract more visitors. Decorations became even more elaborate, and themed events were scheduled every day. Despite the festive atmosphere, my apprehensions grew. The gaiety of the decorations and costumes couldn't mask the chill that had settled deep in my bones. One evening, a few days before Halloween, I was assigned to oversee a special event for children in the central atrium of the mall. As families gathered, watching their children play in costume, I tried to focus on the joy and laughter around me. Yet, my gaze was continuously drawn to the darker corners of the room, to the spaces just beyond the bright lights where shadows gathered. Halfway through the event, as a group of children gathered around a storyteller, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. It was a slight movement, a fluttering like that of a cloak. My heart raced as I turned to look, but there was nothing there. Just families enjoying the Halloween festivities. I told myself it was just my nerves, the stress of the past days catching up with me. But then it happened. Over the sound of music and children's laughter, I heard it again. That eerie, mocking laughter, like a child's but imbued with a malice that no child's voice should carry. It echoed faintly at first, then grew louder, swirling around me. I scanned the crowd, but everyone seemed oblivious to the sound. Determined to face whatever it was, I excused myself from the event and followed the sound, which seemed to be coming from the direction of the food court, now deserted and dimly lit. The laughter led me through the corridors, a chilling guide in the semi-darkness. As I reached the food court, the laughter stopped abruptly. The area was deserted, chairs upturned and tables pushed aside in preparation for the night's cleaning. The silence was oppressive, heavy with anticipation. Then, out of the shadows, the cloaked figure emerged, its presence as menacing as ever. It stood there, watching me, its face still hidden beneath the hood. This time, I didn't hesitate. I approached it, my steps resolute. "Who are you? What do you want?" I demanded, my voice echoing in the empty space. The figure remained silent for a long moment before it finally spoke, its voice a cold whisper that sent shivers down my spine. "We are the unseen, the shadows you forget to fear," it said cryptically. Before I could respond, it turned and vanished into the darkness as suddenly as it had appeared. I stood there, frozen, trying to process the encounter. Who, or what, was this cloaked figure? And what did it mean by the unseen? I returned to the event, my mind racing with questions. The rest of the evening passed without incident, and the laughter and play of the children gradually eased some of the tension I felt. However, the mystery of the cloaked figure and the monstrous creature continued to haunt me. I delved into research, reading about folklore, myths, and paranormal occurrences, looking for anything that might explain what I had seen. I spoke to experts, joined online forums, and even consulted with paranormal investigators. Despite my efforts, answers were elusive. The encounters remained isolated incidents, with no further appearances of either the creature or the figure. But the impact of those nights changed me. I became more observant, more attuned to the subtleties of the environment around me, always aware of the thin veil between the normal and the paranormal. Now, as I continue my duties at the mall, I carry with me the knowledge of the unknown, the unseen forces that might lurk just out of sight. Whether they are figments of collective imagination or manifestations of something truly supernatural, I've learned to respect the mysteries that defy explanation. And as for the mall, it remains a place of both commerce and mystery, a space where the everyday meets the extraordinary, reminding us that the world is far stranger and more complex than we might imagine. I never believed in local legends. Figured they were just stories spun to keep kids out of trouble or tourists entertained. But last fall, during a long weekend in late October, my skepticism got turned on its head. My name's Mike, and if you've ever felt that icy prickle of doubt when the wind howls a bit too mournfully, then you might understand why my hands still shake a bit when I talk about what happened in Silver Creek. It started as a getaway, my buddy Tom and I heading out to a cabin his family owned in northern Nevada, right on the edge of a little town called Silver Creek. Tom had recently moved back from the East Coast and was eager to show off the wide open spaces of the West. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by miles of sprawling sagebrush and brittle grass that whispered under the weight of the wind. It was a rustic spot, all rugged wood and shadows that danced on the walls from the fireplace's flickering light. We arrived late afternoon, the sky a canvas of deepening blues and purples as the sun dipped behind the distant peaks. The air was crisp, carrying the tang of sage and the earthy dampness of cold stone and dirt, the kind of smell that tells you winter is waiting just around the corner. Tom fumbled with the key, cursing under his breath as the lock resisted before giving way with a gritty sigh. Inside, the cabin was exactly as you'd imagine. Cozy, a little musty, filled with mismatched furniture that had seen better days. We spent the evening catching up, grilling steaks over an old charcoal barbecue outside, and listening to the lonely calls of coyotes that seemed too close for comfort. As darkness enveloped the cabin, we pulled our chairs closer to the fire, the warmth pushing back against the chill that started to creep in from the corners of the room. That's when Tom brought it up, the legend of the Skinwalker. He told it with a grin, half in jest, but his voice dropped to a whisper that made the hairs on my neck stand up. According to local lore, skinwalkers were evil witches, creatures that could take the form of any animal they killed. But they were most commonly seen as coyotes, creatures of cunning and stealth. Skinwalkers, huh? I scoffed, throwing another log onto the fire. Sounds like a good way to scare tourists. Tom's smile faded a bit as he stared into the flames. Well, the story goes that they're guardians of these lands. They keep unwanted folks away. It's said they can curse you, follow you, mimic voices of people you know. His voice trailed off, and he shook his head as if to clear it from his thoughts. The wind picked up outside, the cabin groaning under its weight. The firelight cast elongated shadows against the walls, shadows that twisted and turned in the flickering light, almost as if they were alive. I tried to laugh it off, but the unease was palpable. We decided to call it a night, the uneasiness settling around us like a thick blanket. I lay in my room, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the relentless wind against the windows. Sleep proved elusive. My mind kept replaying Tom's tales, the legends feeling all too real in the isolated darkness of the cabin. I turned over, trying to quiet my thoughts, when I heard it, a soft, scraping sound outside my window. I froze, straining to listen over the pounding of my heart. The scraping grew louder, more insistent, as if something, or someone, was dragging a branch across the wooden siding of the cabin. I thought of the Skinwalker, a shiver running down my spine. Gathering my courage, I tiptoed to the window, my breath fogging up the cold glass as I peered into the night. The moon was high, casting a silvery glow across the landscape, turning the sagebrush into a sea of pale shadows. And there, at the edge of the clearing, stood a figure. It was too far to make out details, but it was unmistakably human, or so it seemed. The figure stood motionless, watching the cabin. I blinked, and it was gone, vanished as if it had been nothing more than a trick of the light. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak and whisper of the wind sounded like footsteps, like whispers. When dawn finally broke, painting the sky in streaks of pink and orange, I felt a relief wash over me. Tom was already up, making coffee, his face drawn and pale. "You hear that last night?" he asked, his voice low. "Yeah," I admitted, my voice just as shaky. "The scraping, right?" Tom nodded, pouring 2 steaming cups. "And the figure at the edge of the clearing." I froze, the cup halfway to my lips. "You saw it too?" He nodded again, his eyes troubled. We might not be alone out here. The rest of the morning was tense as we debated what to do. The logical part of my mind screamed that it was just a prank, maybe local kids messing with us. But another part, a deeper, primal part, whispered that we were trespassing in a world that wasn't ours. As the sun climbed higher, we decided to stay one more night. We'd come for a weekend away, and I wasn't about to let some creepy story and a stranger in the night ruin that. But as the day wore on, and shadows once again began to stretch long and thin across the ground, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the legend of the Skinwalker was more than just a tale to scare us. It was a presence, a lingering dread that clung to the air like the chill of approaching winter. We spent the day trying to distract ourselves with hikes around the property and checking out the nearby town. Silver Creek was small, just a blip on the map really, but it had a rustic charm, with its old storefronts and the locals who eyed us with a mix of curiosity and something else I couldn't quite place. Wariness, maybe. We stopped at a diner for lunch, the kind of place that had seen better days but still served a mean burger. While there, we tried to glean more about the local lore from the waitress, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "So, heard anything strange about the skinwalkers around here?" Tom asked casually as she refilled our coffee. The waitress paused, her expression tightening. "Don't hold much with talking about such things," she said tersely. "Brings bad luck." We exchanged a glance, the air suddenly heavy. It seemed that the legends weren't just idle tales here. They were a part of the fabric of the community, woven into the very silence that hung between the spoken words. Back at the cabin, the afternoon waned into evening, and with it came a resurgence of our apprehensions. We decided against another barbecue, opting instead for sandwiches inside, away from the encroaching darkness. As night fell, we locked the doors and settled into an uneasy vigil, the cabin once again enveloped in the sound of the wind and the crackling of the fire. "I'm setting up a camera," Tom declared suddenly, standing up to retrieve a small digital camera from his bag. "If anything happens tonight, we'll catch it on film." I nodded, feeling a mixture of fear and anticipation. Setting up the camera facing the window, we tried to watch a movie to distract ourselves, but my eyes kept darting to the small screen of the camera, half expecting to see that figure appear at any moment. Hours ticked by, the movie long since ended, the fire reduced to embers. The wind had picked up, howling around the cabin with mournful fury. I tried to convince myself it was just the weather, just the normal sounds of an old cabin settling. But then, amidst the wind, came a sound that froze us both. A low, guttural growl, so close it seemed to be just outside the door. Tom muted the TV, his face pale under the flickering light from the camera screen. We sat in silence, listening. The growl came again, longer, more menacing. Grabbing the bear spray we'd brought, we edged towards the window, peering out into the darkness. Nothing, just the sway of the trees and the brush, their shapes distorted into grotesque forms by the moonlight. Then, the camera beeped, a motion alert. We rushed to look at the screen, hearts in our throats. The footage showed the edge of the clearing, and there it was, the figure again, clearer this time. It was indeed human-shaped, but horribly gaunt, its movements jerky and unnatural as it moved closer to the cabin. "It's real," Tom whispered, horror-struck. "It's really real." The figure stopped just at the edge of the light cast by the cabin windows, then crouched, its form blurring as if shifting, changing. My stomach churned as I watched, paralyzed. The camera captured the transformation, the figure's limbs elongating, its back arching unnaturally. Then, with a swift, fluid motion, it stood upright again, now clearly no longer human, its eyes reflecting the light like those of an animal. We backed away from the window, the reality of what we were dealing with crashing down on us. A skinwalker, a creature of nightmare, was just outside, and it knew we were watching. What do we do? I managed to choke out. Tom was shaking, but his voice was resolute. We stay inside. We don't go out there. The rest of the night was a blur of fear and whispered plans of escape at first light. We barricaded the door, watched the camera, and jumped at every shadow and every sound. The skinwalker appeared a few more times on the camera, each appearance closer to the cabin than the last, until it finally seemed to lose interest, or perhaps it was satisfied with the terror it had instilled. By dawn, we were haggard, exhausted, but alive. The first light of day felt like a reprieve, the sunrise scattering the shadows and, with them, the nightmare of the night. We packed up without speaking, the car ride back to civilization silent, except for the gravel crunching under the tires and the occasional sniffle from Tom. We've never gone back to Silver Creek, and we don't talk much about what happened. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder about the Skinwalker, about what it wanted, about whether it's still roaming the sagebrush-covered hills, watching and waiting. But those are thoughts for daylight, for times when the wind doesn't howl quite so mournfully. Because at night, when the shadows lengthen and the world seems to hold its breath, I can't help but remember the eyes in the darkness and the sound of something not quite animal, not quite human, watching, waiting.